We're here with Dr. Tom Calma to talk about just justice and to understand from his extensive experience what it means for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's health to be incarcerated. So I'll just pass over to Tom and he can introduce himself. He's probably the best person to do it. And I'm Summer Finlay as well, for those of you who don't know me.
Hi everybody, wherever you are. I understand we might even have an international visitor to this site. My name is Tom Calma and I come from Darwin in Northern Australia, and my mother's side are Kungarakan and my father's Iwija, and we're very fortunate in that we have our own land back that we've been able to get back via the Northern Territory Aboriginal Land Rights Act over many years of struggle, but we've got it back, so that's very beneficial for us. And as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, I think it's very important that whenever we can secure land, it gives us that ability to maintain our relationship with our land and our culture. And as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, irrespective of where we are across the nation, we still have a culture and we still are a peoples. And that's very important for all of us to remember. And I think when we talk about incarceration, that's a real issue that we have to consider. That one of the reasons why our people sometimes behave, and this is not an excuse, but this is just an acknowledgement, that they behave in ways that could get them in jail or to commit offences, is because of past traumas, disassociation with land and culture, whether we were forcibly removed or whether in modern days we are controlled in one way or another in some of our remoter areas of Australia, but also in some of our regional and rural areas. People feel the same, and racism is a big influence in the way people behave, and discrimination, and particularly when it relates to employment. And if our people can't get jobs and meaningful jobs, then they are left on their own devices, and sometimes they will turn to crime. So what are we talking about? Well, just justice, and that's a crowd-funding initiative to try and raise awareness in the general population about incarceration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, to try and explain it in a way that people can better understand why our people are so overrepresented. In the Northern Territory, for example, nearly 80% of our people, or the prisons, comprise of Aboriginal people. West Australia is very high, not quite as high, but similar numbers. But in every prison in Australia, we are overrepresented. In every youth detention centre, we are overrepresented. And so we have to look at this as a very, very significant issue. It's an Australian issue that belongs to all Australians. If we're going to resolve it, if we are going to be able to address it, we need to work together on it. And that's what Just Justice is about. It's about raising that awareness and to give a whole range of people who are experts or who are affected because of incarceration to be able to have a say. And that's what's important about this whole campaign, and that's why it's important that we need to talk. And also for our people who are working, and some have been working for years to try and support our people who are in prison, to try and keep our people out of prison, to be able to get a just service through our legal systems in Australia to help keep people out of prisons. It's a chance to give those people a voice and to be able to share their experiences, their knowledge and their solutions. And that's what it's about. It's not about governments trying to make solutions for us. It's about us having a real and meaningful role in creating solutions to the issues that affect our people, which is most important. And of course, one of the best solutions is to look at a justice reinvestment model, and that is to try and work with people before they offend so that they don't get caught up in that whole quagmire of relationships with the justice system, which goes into youth detention, which could progress and most likely to progress onto adult prisons. And then on release from adult prisons, we also find that a high proportion of Aboriginal people reoffend, which gets them back in the system. So it becomes a very, very insidious circular process that we have to look at solutions for, and they are very, I guess, very broad solutions, and there are many solutions, but they're issues that we all have to confront, and Just Justice is one of the forums to be able to do that.
So we've got a question here for you. We're just wondering, what did you think at the political level can be done to actually address over-incarceration?
Look, I think there's a couple of things. In Australia, what we've had is a Senate inquiry to look at Justice Reinvestment, which is about how to stop people from offending. That hasn't been progressed through the Parliament, but it's an issue that needs to get all politicians involved in. The other is that we need to look at ways of identifying and doing the hard research to identify why our people are incarcerated in the first place. And when you start to look at the statistics, we know that the majority of people are in there for what we'd consider to be soft crimes, or not major crimes to get them in there, and they can be anything from non-payment of fines, not participating in community service orders, disruptive activities on a number of occasions, and so they're the issues, and many of those issues can be addressed outside of it. So it's about making sure that the political system understands it. We know that the judicial system, the judges and magistrates, are very keen to look at alternative practices, things like the Koori courts, the Nunga courts, looking at diversionary programs. We've just got to make sure that those sort of support programs are funded by the politicians as and where they exist or need to be created. And so it's why it's got to be a solution that involves the judiciary, the politicians and the people. And it can't be done for us, it's got to be done with us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and we've got enough people out there willing, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, willing to work on trying to develop up these solutions, and so we just need the opportunity to be able to do that.
So another question for you then. I know that one of the many hats that you wear is in relation to mental health. So just wondering if you could maybe have a chat about the links between mental health and incarceration, or, you know, whether it's a chicken and egg type situation sometimes.
Well, we do know that for all people in prisons, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, that it's been identified that there are very high levels of mental health issues that need to be addressed. We also know that when it comes to Aboriginal people, our burden of mental health for those who've been incarcerated is much greater than the non-Indigenous population. We also know that people who have been incarcerated, particularly over a longer term, on release have a shorter lifespan than others. We also know that too often people are not getting good treatment while they're in prisons, and on release the support is not there to follow through on that treatment that they may have got in prisons, and so we need to address that. So we've got to look at both the incarcerated services provided plus the release, both the post and pre-release programs, to make sure that our people are empowered to take control of their lives when they get out. We've seen some really good initiatives around Australia where prisons have gone smoke-free, following on from the New Zealand experience, and the Northern Territory is a good case where it's now been into a second year where prisons have got smoke-free, and whilst there's been a few issues, it's a great opportunity for our people, as well as others incarcerated, to not smoke, because we also know that smoking contributes to about 20% of the burden of death by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and is a major contributor to the chronic diseases that our people suffer. So we've got to look at all those issues, and including mental health. And we also know that the incidence of people taking their own lives after they've been incarcerated is very high, but it's high across the nation. for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people generally.
So just another question for you. Just wonder if you could maybe explain the Justice Reinvestment approach a little bit more. I think it's probably a new concept to a lot of people, and I think it's quite important for people to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, a very good question. And look, it's something that I reported on in 2009 when I was Social Justice Commissioner. It's what I'd seen happening in the United States, and that is where and it's now up to, I think, 19 states across the US where they've got programs in place called Justice Reinvestment programs. And that is to say that it costs a lot of money to keep somebody in prison. If we use some of that money to invest in the community prior to people committing a crime, then that's an important investment which will save money in the long term. We know that if in New South Wales it costs an average of $230,000 per year to keep a youth incarcerated, and we argue that you're better off getting that $230,000 and investing that in the community with a youth worker or two, a social worker, other support services into the community before people commit crimes. And that's what Justice Reinvestment's about. It's about governments taking a responsible position, and this is generally state and territory governments, to recognise that instead of building a new prison or extending a prison and more prison beds, use that money to invest in the community, because the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom show us that these models, when they're taken on, you actually in the longer term reduce your imprisonment rate, which saves money. So it's rediverting money that would be spent on building new prisons back into the community to look at education programs, employment programs, and treatment programs. For people who may be addicted, and under that addiction they then commit a crime, or they commit a crime to be able to support that addiction. And so if we can try and divert people away from those behaviours, we have a better outcome in the longer term. And so that's what Justice Reinvestment's about. It's about building the strength and capacity of the community, and to therefore divert people from a life of crime. And the more people we can stop from committing crime, the less victims we'll have, which is also something we need to recognise, is that too often when there are crimes, and they're crimes of the person, or even through theft, there's a victim behind that. And so the investment in Justice Reinvestment saves both incarceration, but it also reduces the number of people, the victims of crime.
So I was just listening to Tom introduce himself before. We did some videos before this, and something you said was around, native title, where you're from, and that you guys were lucky enough to get your land back. And I'm just wondering if maybe you could have a think about self-determination, the importance of actually having our land back, and the impact that you think that'll have on health and incarceration rates.
Well, look, particularly on health, and both our mental health and our social and emotional well-being is impacted if we are somebody who is able to have a relationship back with our land and our culture and our language. And it doesn't mean that we have to be fluent speakers in our Aboriginal language, but to know that we as a person, are respected, and that in our own identity we can feel safe and secure, and not feel that we're going to be ridiculed by somebody because they might believe that we don't have a culture. But I would argue that every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person across the nation, if you identify, then that's the first step to understanding your own culture. We do know that people who have a relationship, they live off their land, they're able to feel secure on their land, have better mental health and physical health outcomes. Generally, there are some people who don't, because they might abuse a substance, or there might be other factors that impact on that. But what we do know, and we've seen this through a very important study called it's a longitudinal study called the Utopia study, where they looked at people living in the township of Utopia, living off the land, being secure in in their culture, their language, their law practices and so forth, had better health outcomes than people living in suburbia or in areas that are more regional. So, yep, relationship with the land is important, not only from what you're able to derive off that land by way of food, but also because you can feel secure, you can feel that you're respected as a person because you're able to have your land. And it's important when we look at it from a social determinants point of view to recognise that cultural determinants are equally important. So I can hear somebody saying, well, what is a social determinant? Well, if we look at health, we've got to say, to be healthy, the first thing to recognise is that governments can't make us healthy. We have to take that responsibility upon ourselves to be healthy. And government's responsibility is to be able to help facilitate that process by providing access to doctors and other health professionals and medications and so forth. But short of shoving it down our throat, they can't make us healthy. So that's important. And so we look at a social determinants perspective, and that's all those other things that impact on whether we're healthy or not. Education, employment, relationship with the judicial system, racism, overcrowded housing, mental health issues, whether we've got a reasonable income or no income at all. They are what we call determinants of health, and they're all the things that we have to look at when we want to make sure that we do enjoy good health. And so they're the issues that I talk about. Culture is important. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's about the person, it's about a holistic approach to health, it's about culture. They're all being central to our health and well-being. And so that's why relationship with land and culture and self are very important for both our physical and our mental health. To have the resilience to be able to challenge people if they might want to discriminate or be racist towards us. To know that we don't have to turn to a substance to be able to cope with life is so important. And that's why we have to look at it from a holistic perspective to determine how we can, as a peoples, progress.
So we've got a question here from Mark Locke, who's hosting Indigenous X this week. So thanks, Mark, for sending through a question. Mark was asking two questions. He asked about the points in the justice system, the criminal justice system, which can be addressed, but also wants to know about some of the things that have been implemented. He made a link to an article, The Inappropriateness of the Criminal Justice System, Indigenous Australian Criminology Perspectives. So I'm not sure if you're aware of that one, but maybe thinking about, there's been a number of reports, there's been obviously the death in custody reports, thinking about what's been implemented and what maybe else needs to be implemented.
Yeah, sure. I'm not familiar with that specific report. Just in the title of it, I might have flicked through it. But I think, there's a couple of really big pressure points. Other than, the over-representation at the, in the adult prisons, youth is a major concern, and so are women who are incarcerated are a major concern that we have to look at and to get back down and to identify why. But I think what's really important is that, governments, and we say governments are a key player because they are the ones that provide the funding to be able to support these programs, and they do that because they have a responsibility. It's part of our basic human rights to be able to enjoy housing, employment, health programs, to enjoy representation by the bodies that we're represented by, and governments have a responsibility to be able to fund that as we are citizens of this nation. So if you start to look at those major priority areas and look at some of the solutions that are out there, I think the feedback that I've received are that firstly, we've got the Aboriginal legal services. It's good to hear that they've been refunded under this round, albeit not as the same level or not keeping up with the pace. But if you just look at the level of support that Aboriginal legal services get compared to the mainstream services is very disproportionate, and we are always, as they say, living off of the smell of an oily rag versus what the mainstream system has got. And so we need to be able to ensure that, and we want the politicians and the bureaucrats to understand that they have to invest in us, because we've got the solutions. We're the ones who are starting to create these opportunities, and we're taking that responsibility through the Koori courts and the Murray courts and the Noongar courts, Noongar courts, I should say, and they're going. We're trialling a Justice Reinvestment initiative in the township of Burke in New South Wales. That's come under the New South Wales or Justice Reinvestment for New South Wales Youth campaign, and that's being run by the Aboriginal Legal Service in New South Wales with the community of Burke and other players. It's got a lot of support from the judiciary, the senior judiciary, who want to also work to make a difference, and they are sick of having to just create incarceration as a solution. Some have been able to refer to other programs, but we need to be able to support a lot of the youth programs that have been had their funding restricted. The diversionary or treatment programs like Mount Theo. You've got the Yarralin project up in northern WA that works on trying to divert suicide for young people. All of these sort of programs that are Aboriginal managed and controlled, and initiatives need to be supported a lot more. We need a lot less support going to the mainstream non-Indigenous bodies to do things for us. It needs to have us supported to do things for ourselves and to be able to have that capacity to be able to do it. And I think we've got to be strong, and justice is one of the ways to raise that awareness, because people will take notice when they start to look at it. Having articles produced through Croaky and Crikey are also very important forums, but supporting the National Justice Coalition that's just been formed is a good way to raise awareness and to respect all of those initiatives that are taking place around the nation, particularly on justice issues. And we've got peak bodies like ANTAR who are supporting these initiatives and supporting similar initiatives in Queensland and West Australia to try and divert people out of prisons and work with the community in a respectful way.
So, thank you for that. I just wanted to see if there's anything else you wanted to add. We've asked you some questions and just reflect on, again, some of the solutions that you've seen and anything else you think is really important for people to keep in their minds when they're thinking about incarceration and Aboriginal people.
Yeah, there are a whole range of things, and thank you, Summer, for organising this. I think Periscope, my first effort at Periscope, but I hope that it has some meaning for those who are on the other end of the Periscope. That it means something. There are initiatives out there, and I know that in the ACT, one of our friends, non-Aboriginal person who's working with Aboriginal people in prison, is very keen to develop a mentoring program to be able to support people while they're incarcerated and on release, which I think is a great initiative, and there are very similar programs out there. I think we need to always remember that every opportunity we get to meet with a politician, we should take that opportunity to be able to promote what we want to have happen. And we shouldn't just wait for the time we bump into the politician in the street, but there's nothing wrong with making appointments to go and visit them in their local electoral offices and have a conversation. I think talking to backbenchers, and particularly to keep them informed about the issues that we are challenged with, but also to be able to talk to them about the solutions that we've identified that we'd like to see supported, and particularly if we can show that we've had some successes. But we know across the board that a lot of the failings that happen in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs, and some of those experiments, as people like to describe them, fail because of not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but they fail because governments and politicians aren't consistent in their approach to applying these programs, to applying funding, which is always short-term. Short-term might meet a need now, but it's not a long-term solution. The long-term solution is identifying a very clear plan that engages with people, that has bipartisan support, that has a long-term plan. And that's why the Close the Gap is so important, because we talk about a 25-year plan, a generational plan, and our objective is to try and get government to take a bipartisan approach to that, to know that they have to invest over a 25-year period to the year 2030, or the government says 2031, if we're going to make a difference. And by just funding 2015 and not 2016 is not going to make a difference. So all of us need to raise the awareness of politicians and other supporters around it. If you get the opportunity, raise with our friends in business and other friends and colleagues that we've got a crowdfunding campaign going called Justice. It's about trying to collect funding so that we can pay people and support people to write these articles, to be able to keep the information flowing. But none of this will ever work unless we, as the people affected, are the most involved in this process, and it has an even greater chance of success if we can work together as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and support organisations like the National Congress, like the Justice Coalition, and put pressure on the government to put some targets on justice, with the COAG targets, similar to what we've done with the Close the Gap campaign. And we need targets on justice, we need targets on mental health if we are going to make a difference, because once a target is set in, it then makes governments accountable, and that they have to report against those targets. And that's why they shy away from it, because they don't want to be accountable. But we have to continually work with them to get them to understand that there's nothing wrong with accountability. They expect us to be accountable for the money that they hand us. We want them to be accountable for the money that they hand out, also in the directions that they want to. And not just continually blame us for not success, but for them to take some responsibility and recognising that they are major contributors to the success or failure of many of our programs. And so we want to work in partnership with governments, and that's the way we're going to be able to progress the status of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and make sure we do achieve equality and outcomes across education, across employment and across health. And boy, wouldn't it be interesting if our incarceration rate was the same as the non-Indigenous population. They'd be closing prisons down all over the nation. So that's what our objective is. That's what we need to work for. And and if I can ask you to think about and become more informed about Justice Reinvestment and lend your support to that campaign, namely to stop people, to work with people to try and help them to not commit the crimes in the first place. We'll be a better society if we can do that, and we'll have less victims.
Fantastic. Well, I have to say that was a fantastic Periscope, and it's the first time I've done one to interview somebody else, so thank you for being my guinea pig. It's been a pleasure, and we're really glad that we've been able to have you, and I have to say I've learned a lot as well hearing from you. So just want to say thank you on behalf of the Just Justice team, which is obviously more than me. It's Melissa Sweet, Mari McNinty, who I can never say her last name properly, and Mitchell Ward. So thank you again to everybody, and we've had a lot of love on Twitter. So a lot of Twitter love and lots of love hearts too. You can see.
I've seen those love hearts.
Yep.
I wonder what they were.
Yeah, so that's telling them they like what you're saying. So
right,
just
okay.
want to say goodbye.
Well, no, thank you, and thank you for getting involved, because the more that we can get engaged and more involved we can be, the better off we'll be as a society and our people. And keep those hearts flowing. Go.